For as long as I can remember, I woke up before everyone else in that house. I made breakfast while my sister slept in. I washed dishes while she watched television. I stayed home on weekends to help while she went out with friends and came back laughing. I told myself it was just how some families worked. Some people carry more, some people carry less. I told myself maybe I was just stronger. Maybe they needed me more. Maybe one day they would look at me and say thank you. That day never came. What came instead was a small white envelope in my mailbox, a DNA kit I had ordered on a quiet Tuesday night when something inside me finally said enough. I almost didn't open the results. I sat with that envelope for 3 days before my hands stopped shaking long enough to tear it open. What was inside did not just answer one question. It blew apart 33 years of a life I thought I understood. Every memory shifted. Every sacrifice reframed. Every moment of being treated as less than suddenly made a terrible, painful kind of sense. And the people who raised me, they had known the whole time. Everly spent 33 years carrying a weight she didn't understand. One envelope explained all of it. But what she does with that truth? That part will stay with you. Subscribe now and hit notifications. This story is just getting started. My name is Everly. I am 33 years old and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. On the outside, my life looks steady: small apartment, decent job, quiet routine. But if you grew up in my house, you would understand why quiet feels like a luxury to me now. From the time I was old enough to reach the kitchen counter, I was the one who cooked, cleaned, organized, and held things together. Not because I volunteered. Not because I was asked nicely. Because it was simply expected, the way sunrise is expected, the way gravity works. Nobody thanked me for it. Nobody questioned it. It was just the way things were. And for a very long time, I believed that too. Saturday mornings told the whole story. I would be up at 7, starting breakfast, wiping down counters, running a load of laundry before my mother even came downstairs. Riley, my younger sister, would sleep until 10, come down in her pajamas, sit at the table I had already set, and eat the food I had already made. My mother would smile at her and say, "Morning, baby, you sleep okay?" Then she would hand me the dish rag without making eye contact. Not once in all those years did anyone at that table look up and ask if I had slept okay. I was not the daughter they worried about. I was the daughter they used. And I was only just beginning to understand the difference. One Saturday when I was about 19, Riley came downstairs dressed and ready to go out, new outfit, hair done, completely unbothered. My mother handed me a handwritten chore list before I had finished my first cup of coffee. Grocery run, bathroom scrubbing, window cleaning, dinner prep by 6. I looked at that list and then looked at Riley pulling on her jacket. "Where are you going?" I asked. Riley said, "Shopping." Mom gave me her card. My mother said nothing, did not look up, just turned back to her magazine. I folded that list and put it in my pocket. I did every single thing on it. I always did. That was the arrangement nobody ever sat down and explained to me. I asked my father directly one evening when I was around 22. I had come home after a long work shift to find a sink full of dishes, a note from my mother listing things that needed doing, and Riley on the couch watching television. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment, then walked to where my father was sitting and asked him quietly, "Why is it always me?" He looked up from his newspaper. Something moved across his face, not confusion, not surprise. Something older and heavier than either of those things. He held my eyes for just a moment, then looked back down at his paper and said, "Just help your mother, Everly." That non-answer stayed with me for years. There was a family photo in the hallway, the kind taken at one of those portrait studios. Everyone in matching colors, everyone smiling. I must have walked past it 10,000 times. But one evening I stopped and really looked at it. My parents in the center, Riley tucked under my mother's arm, beaming. Me on the far left, standing slightly apart, smiling the smile I had learned to produce on command. I stared at that photo for a long time. Something about it had always sat wrong with me and I could never explain what. It was not the distance in the image exactly. It was something in my mother's posture. The way her body curved naturally toward Riley and only politely acknowledged me. I walked away and said nothing. Riley said it at dinner one night like it was the most casual thing in the world. We were passing bread around the table and she looked at my mother and said, "I'm obviously your favorite. Everyone knows it." My mother laughed. My father smiled into his food. I kept my eyes on my plate and cut my chicken into smaller pieces than necessary. Nobody looked at me to see how that landed. Nobody said, "That's not true, we love you both equally." There was just laughter, warm and easy and completely comfortable. Riley was the favorite and I was the fixture, the one who kept the house running, kept the peace, kept everything together. The one the joke was about without anyone realizing it was a joke at all. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special about it, dishes done, apartment quiet, some television show playing that I wasn't really watching. I had been feeling something for weeks that I couldn't name. not sadness exactly. Something more like a question that had been sitting in the back of my throat for 33 years, getting heavier and heavier. I picked up my phone, opened a browser, and before I fully processed what I was doing, I had ordered a DNA testing kit. Standard ancestry and biological relatives package. I put my phone face down on the couch cushion and stared at the ceiling. I don't know what I was looking for exactly. I just knew that something in my life had never added up, and I was finally tired of pretending the math was fine. I was 14 when my class planned a 3-day trip to Washington, D.C. I had been looking forward to it for 2 months, saved my own money, packed my bag the night before, set my alarm. The morning of the trip, my mother came into my room at 5 a.m. and said she and my father were going to visit friends out of town for the weekend, and someone needed to stay home with Riley. Just like that, no discussion, no apology, no acknowledgement that I had been counting the days. I unpacked my bag while my classmates boarded that bus. Riley never even said thank you. My mother was already loading the car when I carried my suitcase back to the closet. College orientation was supposed to be the first real moment that belonged entirely to me. New city, new start, new people who had no idea I was the family workhorse. I had my schedule printed, my dorm assignment confirmed, everything ready. 2 days before I was supposed to leave, my mother called me into the kitchen and told me she had been having terrible migraines and could not manage the house alone that week. She needed me to stay. She said it the way she always said things, not as a request, as a fact. I called the university and arranged a late registration. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I would make up for it. I never really did. Riley's 16th birthday was a party, decorated backyard, catered food, a custom cake with her name in pink frosting, 20 of her friends laughing until midnight. My 16th birthday was a Tuesday dinner. Spaghetti because it was fast. A card my mother had signed without writing anything personal inside it. No party, no friends invited, no cake with my name on it. I told myself birthdays were not a big deal. I told myself I was more mature than that. But you can only tell yourself something so many times before part of you stops believing it. Every year, the difference between how they celebrated her and how they acknowledged me drew the same quiet picture. I just was not ready to look at it directly yet. I had lunch with my oldest friend Priya last spring. We had known each other since elementary school, the kind of friendship that survives distance and years without much effort. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, she said something that stopped me completely. She said, "Everly, I always thought something was off in your house. Even when we were kids, the way your mom talked to you versus Riley, it was different. I never knew how to bring it up." I set my fork down. Nobody had ever said that out loud to me before, not once in 33 years. I had spent so long telling myself I was imagining it that hearing someone else name it made the air feel completely different. I found an old journal in a box while clearing out my closet last winter. Dark blue cover, my teenage handwriting inside. I flipped to a random page and stopped. It was an entry from when I was 16. I had written, "I don't understand why I feel like a guest in my own family. Like everyone else belongs here, and I am just visiting and doing chores until the real daughter shows up." I read that sentence 3 times. A 16-year-old version of me had felt something so clearly, so specifically, and had nowhere to put it except a journal she hid under her mattress. I closed it carefully and sat on the floor of my closet for a long time. I realized it one evening while watching something ordinary on television. A parent in the show looked at their child and said, "I am proud of you." Simple, casual, 3 words, and I sat there trying to remember a single time either of my parents had said those exact words directly to me. Not to the room, not in passing. Directly to me, looking at me, meaning me. I could not find one memory, not one. I thought harder: graduations, job promotions, moments I had worked toward and achieved. Nothing. There were plenty of memories of those words directed at Riley. Her grades, her promotions, her choices. For me, there was always something else: a redirect, a new task, a subject change. Never those 3 words. The package arrived on a Thursday afternoon, small white box, discreet label, lighter than I expected. I set it on my kitchen counter and stood there looking at it for a long time. This was just science. Just a swab and a database and some percentages. I told myself it would probably confirm everything was completely normal and I would feel slightly foolish for ordering it, but I did not open it that evening. I made dinner, watched television, and went to bed. Friday came and went. Saturday, I moved it to the side to wipe the counter down. Sunday night, I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and set it back down again. Something about opening it felt like a door I could not close once I walked through it. Monday night came and something shifted. I do not know what was different about that particular evening. Same apartment, same quiet, same life. But I picked up that kit, opened the box, read the instructions twice, and completed the test before I could talk myself out of it. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I sealed the sample, packed it back into the return envelope, grabbed my keys, and drove to the nearest mailbox in my pajamas at 10:30 at night. I dropped it in before I could hesitate. Standing there in the parking lot in the dark, I felt something strange, not relief exactly, not fear exactly. Something in between, like I had just set something in motion that had its own momentum now. The results were supposed to take 10 to 14 business days. I told myself I would not think about it. I almost succeeded. The first week passed without too much difficulty. Work kept me busy, routine kept me grounded. But somewhere in the second week, a quiet anxiety started sitting just below the surface of everything I did. I would be in the middle of a work call and feel it. Making coffee in the morning and feeling it. Lying in bed at night definitely feels it. I kept checking the website portal even though it always said processing. I started building a mental case for why the results would be completely normal, because part of me already suspected they would not be. The email arrived on a Wednesday. I was sitting at my kitchen table eating toast, still in my work clothes from the waist up and sweatpants from the waist down, laptop open for a morning meeting. A new email notification appeared at the top of my screen, subject line, "Your Ancestry DNA results are ready." I stared at that notification for a full minute without clicking it. My toast went cold. My coffee went untouched. The morning meeting notification popped up and I closed it without a second thought. Whatever was in that portal had waited 14 business days. It could wait 5 more minutes while I sat there and remembered what it felt like to not know. Because I understood somehow that once I clicked it, everything would be different. I clicked. The portal loaded slowly, my name at the top, the ancestry breakdown on the left, and on the right side, a section labeled biological relatives. I scrolled to the DNA relationship summary first. There was a percentage. A specific, clinical, undeniable percentage next to my father's name because I had listed him during registration. I read it once, then again, then a third time as though the number might change if I looked long enough. It did not change. I set my coffee cup down on the table very carefully, the way you put something fragile down when your hands have suddenly stopped being reliable. The kitchen was completely silent. Outside, a car passed. A bird made some sound. My whole life was rearranging itself, and the world outside kept moving like nothing had happened. The science was clear, and it did not soften my feelings. 0% shared DNA with the man I had called my father for 33 years. On my mother's side, the percentage was present but lower than full biological, a number that raised its own separate questions I was not ready to process yet. I was not fully my mother's daughter either, not in the way I had always assumed. I sat with those two facts side by side and felt something I can only describe as the floor dropping away slowly and completely. Not a dramatic collapse, just a quiet, steady disappearance of everything solid I had been standing on. The people who raised me, who had me cook their meals and miss my school trips, were not who I thought they were. I did not move for 40 minutes. Because I looked at the clock when I finally picked up my phone, and it had been 40 minutes since I sat down with that toast. I scrolled to my mother's contact, stared at her name, and put the phone back down. I scrolled to my best friend's name, stared at it, and put the phone down again. There was nobody I could call at that moment who would know what to say. This was not a breakup or a job loss or a bad diagnosis. This was the complete reframing of every single memory I had, every chore, every missed birthday party, every time my father looked away when I asked him a direct question, all of it clicking into terrible, clarifying focus. By evening, something had hardened inside me. The shock had not gone away, but something else had settled on top of it, a quiet, focused need to look them in the face. I printed the results, folded them once, slid them into my jacket pocket. I drove 20 minutes to my parents' house on autopilot, hands easy on the wheel, radio off. I did not rehearse what I would say. I did not plan an argument or prepare for their defense. I just needed to be in that room with those two people and place the truth between us on the table. 33 years of questions deserved at least one honest answer. I pulled into their driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for exactly 1 minute. Then I walked to the front door and knocked. My mother answered the door with a dish towel in her hand and a mild surprise on her face. "Everly, we weren't expecting you." Not unwelcome exactly, just unprepared. The house smelled like dinner, something with garlic and onions on the stove. My father was in his chair in the living room, evening news on low. Riley was on the couch scrolling her phone, legs tucked under her, completely unbothered. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening. I said hello to everyone, hung my jacket on the hook by the door, the results still folded in the pocket, and sat down at the kitchen table. My mother went back to stirring. Nobody suspected anything. The most important conversation of my life was about to begin in the most ordinary room I had ever known. I waited until my mother turned the stove too low and came to sit across from me. My father stayed in his chair, but I could see him from where I sat. Riley had not moved. I reached into my jacket pocket, took out the folded paper, and placed it flat on the table between my mother and me. I smoothed it once with my palm. I need you to read that, I said. My voice came out steady and quiet, steadier than I expected, quieter than the moment deserved. My mother looked at the paper, then at my face, then back at the paper. She did not ask what it was. That small detail, not asking what it was, told me something important before she even unfolded it. My mother unfolded the paper slowly. Her eyes moved across the page, and I watched her face with the same careful attention I had given that DNA portal 2 days earlier. What I expected was shock, wide eyes, sharp intake of breath, the face of someone encountering information they never anticipated. What I saw instead was something that stopped me colder than any shock could have. Her face did not collapse into surprise. It shifted into something that looked terrifyingly, unmistakably like relief. Like someone who had been holding a heavy thing for a very long time and had just been given permission to set it down. That expression lasted only a second before she composed herself, but I saw it. I had spent 33 years reading that face. I did not misread it. I said his name. Dad. He did not respond immediately. I said it again, slightly louder. He set the television remote down, pushed himself up from his chair, and walked into the kitchen. He glanced at the paper on the table, and something passed through his expression so quickly I almost missed it, but I had been waiting for it, watching for exactly this. He did not sit down. He walked past the table to the window above the sink and stood there with his back to the room, hands braced on the counter edge, looking out at the dark backyard. He said nothing. His silence was not the silence of a man processing new information. It was the silence of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head for years and still had no words ready. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the low murmur of the television still running in the other room. Riley had appeared in the doorway at some point. I was aware of her there without looking directly at her. My mother's hands were flat on the table. My father had not moved from the window. I looked at my mother and asked the question I had been carrying since I was old enough to understand that something in our house did not balance. Did you always know I was different? 6 words. I had never said them out loud before in my life. They felt strange leaving my mouth, lighter than I expected, heavier than I could have prepared for. The kitchen stayed silent for a long moment. Then my mother closed her eyes. She did not tell it all at once. It came out slowly, the way water finds its way through old stone, not in a rush, in a trickle, one careful word after another. A relationship before my father, someone she had not told him about at first. A pregnancy she had not fully understood until it was undeniable. My father found out when I was almost 2 years old, not before after. A decision they made together, she said, to raise me without telling me. For stability, she said. For the family, she said. For me, she said, and that particular reason sat in the room between us like something that had caught fire. I listened to every word without interrupting. I owed myself that much, to hear all of it, cleanly, completely, once. When my mother finally stopped talking, the kitchen was completely still. I looked over at the doorway where Riley was standing. She had gone pale, not the pale of someone performing shock, the pale of someone whose legs have stopped feeling reliable. Her phone was hanging loose in her hand, forgotten. She was looking at my mother the way a child looks at a parent when a foundational belief has just cracked down the middle. You never told me either, she said. It was not a question. My mother shook her head. For the first time in 33 years, Riley and I were in exactly the same position, sitting across from parents who had decided what we were allowed to know about our own family. That realization sat between us, strange and heavy and new. I did not slam the door. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry in front of them. I had made that decision somewhere on the drive over without consciously realizing it. I stood up from that kitchen table, folded the DNA results back into my jacket pocket, and looked at my mother for a long, quiet moment. There were things I could have said, pages worth of things, but none of them felt right for that room, that night, those people. I said, I need time. That was all. I took my jacket from the hook by the door, stepped outside into the cool Charlotte night, and walked to my car. Behind me, the door closed softly. I did not look back once. Back in my apartment, I opened the DNA portal again. This time I went straight to the biological relatives section I had barely glanced at 2 days earlier. There were matches. Real ones. A man listed as a close family match, the kind of percentage that meant father or half-sibling. His profile had a first name, a small photo, and a location. 3 states away, Tennessee. I stared at that small profile picture for a long time, a man in his late 50s, outdoors somewhere, squinting slightly into the sun. I did not recognize his face. But something about seeing him there, real and specific and findable, made the ground feel slightly more solid than it had in days. I was not the end of a line. I was the beginning of one. I sent a message through the portal that night, careful, brief, honest. 3 days later, my phone rang with a Tennessee area code. I answered on the second ring. His name was Gerald. His voice was warm and slightly careful, the way voices are when people are trying not to hope too much too fast. We talked for 2 hours. He had known about me, had tried to find me years ago, and hit walls my mother had built carefully and completely. He had a family, 2 sons, a daughter. A wife who had apparently encouraged him for years to keep looking. I cried exactly once during that call when he said, "I always wondered if you were okay." I told him I was getting there. I meant it for the first time in a long time. My mother called 3 times the day after I left. My father called once, which told its own story about the depth of his guilt. Riley sent 2 texts that I read and did not answer. I did not block any of them. I did not send angry replies. I simply let the calls ring out and the texts sit unanswered, the way they had let my questions sit unanswered for 33 years. It did not feel cruel. It felt like the first boundary I had ever drawn with those people that came entirely from me, not from anger, not from performance, but from a clean and quiet understanding that I did not owe anyone access to my healing while I was still in the middle of it. On a Friday night, I sat down with a notebook and wrote a letter to my parents. Not to send, I knew before I wrote the first word that it would never be mailed. I wrote it for myself. I named every Saturday chore list, every birthday that passed without a party, the school trip I never took, the orientation I missed, the journal entry from when I was 16. I wrote it all down in order, calmly, the way you inventory a room before you leave it for the last time. When I finished, I read it back once, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer, not as something to carry forever, as proof that it happened. As evidence I gave to myself, I drove to Tennessee on a Sunday morning in early spring. Gerald had invited me to meet the family, no pressure, his words, just whenever I was ready. I packed a small bag the night before and set my alarm for 6. The drive was 4 hours through countryside that opened up wide and green the further I got from Charlotte. I had a playlist, but I turned it off after the first hour and just drove in silence, watching the landscape change. I was not nervous exactly. I was something I did not have a clean word for: open, maybe? Unguarded in a way I had never been able to afford before. Like I was driving towards something instead of away from it for the very first time. Gerald's wife had made lunch. His daughter was shy for the first 10 minutes and then talked nonstop. His sons shook my hand and one of them said, "We've heard a lot about you." And the way he said it, easy and warm and completely natural, made something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was still tight. I drove home that evening as the sun was going down over the Tennessee hills, windows down, no particular thoughts, just the road and the air and the quiet. For 33 years, I had been the invisible daughter in someone else's story. I had cooked their meals, carried their weight, and waited for a belonging that was never going to come from that house. It was always going to come from here, from the truth, from me finally choosing myself,